The first sign that something was wrong wasn't the perfume. It wasn't the late-night meetings. It wasn't even the way my husband stopped looking at me during dinner. No. The first sign was my office. The office I had worked in for 6 years. The office with the dark walnut desk I paid for myself. The office where I had spent sleepless nights helping Daniel build his company from nothing. The office where I had cried quietly after losing my father. The office where I had signed the papers that secretly made me the owner of the entire building. And on that Monday morning, another woman was sitting in my chair. I still remember how cold the hallway felt as I walked toward the glass doors. People stopped talking when they saw me. That should have warned me. But I smiled anyway. I thought maybe we were preparing for a client presentation. Maybe someone had borrowed my office temporarily. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. I kept telling myself that because the truth felt too ugly. Then I opened the door. A blonde woman in a tight white suit leaned back in my chair like she owned the place. My place. My coffee mug had been moved. My family photo was gone. And my nameplate? Thrown inside a cardboard box near the trash can. For a few seconds, I genuinely thought I had walked into the wrong office. The woman looked up slowly. Then she smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not an apologetic smile. A victorious smile. "Oh," she said casually. "You must be Claire." The way she said my name made my stomach twist. I stared at her. "How do you know my name?" She crossed her legs slowly. "Daniel told me a lot about you." Daniel. My husband. I felt my heartbeat slow down instead of speeding up. That's what happens when shock becomes too heavy. Your body stops reacting normally. "You're in my office," I said quietly. She tilted her head. "Actually, not anymore." Then she reached for a file folder and placed it on the desk. "Daniel asked me to move into the executive office this morning." Executive office, mine. I laughed, not because it was funny, because my brain refused to understand what was happening. Then Daniel walked in, and the second I saw his face, I knew. Not suspicion, not doubt, knowing. The kind that crushes something inside your chest. "Claire," he sighed. "Can we not do this here?" Not do what? Exist? Breathe? Ask why another woman was sitting in my office? I looked between them. The woman didn't even seem uncomfortable. That hurt more than anything. It meant this had been going on for a while, long enough for her to become confident, long enough for him to stop caring whether I noticed. "I'm confused," I said. Daniel rubbed his forehead dramatically. That little performance annoyed me instantly. "Claire, this is Vanessa. She's the new creative director. And? And she'll be using this office now." I stared at him. "So, where exactly am I supposed to work?" He hesitated. Then he pointed toward the far end of the hallway. "There's an empty workspace near storage." Near storage. 6 years. 6 years building his company. 6 years sacrificing weekends. 6 years defending him when investors doubted him. And now I belonged near storage. Vanessa pretended to check emails while listening carefully. That told me everything. This wasn't business. This was humiliation. Public humiliation. And everyone in the office knew it. I looked around. Employees avoided eye contact. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked curious. Nobody spoke. Daniel lowered his voice. "Claire, you've been emotional lately. I think a smaller workspace would reduce stress." Emotional. That word. Men like Daniel always use it when they want to make women sound unstable. I could feel anger rising in my throat, but something stopped me. Maybe pride. Maybe instinct, or maybe the memory of my father's voice. Never lose control in front of people waiting to see you break. So instead of screaming, I smiled, a small smile. the kind that confuses cruel people. Of course, I said softly. Daniel blinked. He expected tears. Vanessa expected drama. Instead, I picked up the cardboard box with my belongings, and right before leaving, I looked directly at Vanessa. Enjoy the office. Then I walked out. What neither of them knew was that 3 years earlier, while Daniel was drowning in debt and begging banks for extensions, I quietly bought the building through a private holding company left to me by my father. Daniel thought he owned success, but he never checked who owned the ground beneath his feet. And before the week ended, he was going to learn. People always assume betrayal begins with lies, but most betrayals actually begin with sacrifice. You give and give and give until one day you realize the other person only learned how much they could take. When I met Daniel, he was charming in the way ambitious men usually are, confident, funny, hungry. He talked about business like it was a living thing. He had dreams bigger than his bank account. Back then, that impressed me. I thought struggle meant sincerity. I was 28. He was 31. We met at a small networking dinner downtown. I remember him joking about the cheap coffee while everybody else tried too hard to sound important. That honesty made him feel different. Or maybe I just wanted to believe it did. At the time, I was already doing well financially. Not because of luck, because my father taught me discipline. He owned several commercial properties before he passed away. And unlike many wealthy parents, he never spoiled me. He taught me contracts, taxes, negotiations, risk. He used to say something I never forgot. Money doesn't change character, Claire. It reveals it. After he passed, I inherited a trust and partial ownership in several investment companies, but I kept my life simple. Most people never knew how much I actually owned, including Daniel, especially Daniel. At first, I hid it because I wanted someone to love me for me. Later, I hid it because I started seeing who he really was. The early years of marriage felt exciting. We worked side by side. Daniel launched a branding agency from a tiny rented office with peeling paint and broken air conditioning. I helped him build everything, not just emotionally, financially, strategically, legally. I designed presentations, handled difficult clients, negotiated contracts, stayed awake fixing disasters while Daniel slept. But publicly, Daniel became the face of the company. And honestly, I allowed it. I didn't care about attention. I cared about building something meaningful together. At least that's what I thought we were doing. Over time, the company grew. Small clients became major accounts. Major accounts became corporate partnerships. Money started flowing. Suddenly, Daniel changed. Not immediately, slowly, like tiny cracks spreading through glass. He became obsessed with appearances, luxury watches, exclusive clubs, young employees who laughed too hard at his jokes. And the more successful he became, the less he acknowledged my role. At events, he introduced me as my wife Claire. Never the woman who helped build this company. I noticed, but I stayed quiet. Because love makes people tolerate disrespect they would never accept from strangers. The real turning point came during the financial crash 3 years earlier. Several major clients pulled contracts. The company nearly collapsed. Daniel panicked. I had never seen fear on his face before. Banks were calling. Payroll was delayed. Lawsuits threatened everything. One night I found him sitting alone in the office staring at unpaid invoices. "I'm finished," he whispered. That night, I saved him. Quietly, without applause, without credit. I used one of my private holding companies to purchase the entire office building through an intermediary. Then I arranged a long-term lease that reduced the company's expenses dramatically. Daniel thought some anonymous investor had rescued the property. He never asked questions. He was too relieved. That should have taught me something. People who never ask where help comes from often don't value the person giving it. The company recovered, and the moment the crisis passed, Daniel became someone I barely recognized, more distant, more arrogant, more cruel in subtle ways. He interrupted me in meetings, dismissed my ideas publicly, corrected me over tiny things just to establish control. And when younger women joined the company, he suddenly started caring very deeply about mentorship. I saw Vanessa months before she moved into my office. Tall, polished, perfect social media smile. She laughed at every sentence Daniel said, even the boring ones, especially the boring ones. The first time I noticed them together, they stopped talking when I entered the room. That silence said enough, but I still didn't confront him. Part of me hoped I was wrong. Part of me feared I wasn't. And deep down, I think I already knew the marriage was ending. I just didn't know how ugly Daniel planned to make it, until the day he gave his mistress my office and humiliated me in front of the entire company. What he didn't realize was that humiliation changes people, especially people who spent years quietly sacrificing for someone else. Because after enough disrespect, silence stops being weakness. The temporary workspace near storage smelled like dust and printer ink. That's where Daniel moved me. No window, no privacy, no respect. At first, employees avoided me. Nobody wanted to be seen taking sides. That's how offices work. People protect paychecks before principles. I didn't blame them. Still, it hurt. Especially because many of them knew how much I had done for the company. I sat quietly at the small desk and opened my laptop. Then I started documenting everything. Every interaction, every message, every change. Because my father taught me another important lesson. When someone powerful becomes careless, never react emotionally first. Collect evidence. 3 hours later, Vanessa walked into my workspace holding a designer coffee cup. She looked around dramatically. "Oh, wow," she said. "This area is smaller than I expected." I kept typing. She leaned against the desk. "You know, this doesn't have to be awkward." I looked up slowly. "What exactly would make this less awkward, Vanessa?" Her smile tightened. "I think Daniel and I deserve honesty from each other." There it was. Not guilt. Possession. She wanted acknowledgement. Validation. Victory. I closed my laptop. "How long?" I asked. She looked surprised by how calm I sounded. "A few months." A few months. Interesting. Because Daniel had stopped touching me 6 months earlier. People rarely realize how many clues betrayal leaves behind. The late nights, the sudden criticism, the emotional distance, the unnecessary arguments. Cheaters often rewrite history so they can feel justified. Suddenly you become difficult, emotional, unsupportive. They need a reason for their betrayal. Otherwise, they would have to admit what they really are. Vanessa folded her arms. "I know this is hard." No. What was hard was pretending this woman mattered more than the years I wasted building a life with Daniel. "I actually feel sorry for you," she added. That almost made me laugh. Sorry for me? The woman sitting in a building she thought belonged to her boyfriend's company? The woman who thought attention from a married man was some kind of achievement? Poor thing. "You should go," I said quietly. She straightened. "Daniel says you've been bitter for a long time." Of course he did. Men like Daniel always prepare the replacement before the relationship officially ends. That way the new woman believes she's rescuing him instead of participating in betrayal. Vanessa lowered her voice. "He says the marriage has been over for years." I stared at her. Then I smiled again, the same small smile. "You should ask him who owns this building." For the first time, confusion crossed her face. "What?" I reopened my laptop. Nothing. Have a good day, Vanessa. She stood there another few seconds, then she left. But I noticed something important. When she walked away, she looked uncertain. Good. That seed needed time to grow. Later that evening, Daniel came home unusually late. I was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing financial reports. He froze slightly when he saw me calm. That bothered him. Cruel people expect emotional chaos after humiliation. When they don't get it, they become uncomfortable. Still awake? He asked. I nodded. We need to talk, he said. There it was. The speech. The rehearsed justification. He loosened his tie dramatically. I think we've grown apart. Interesting. Not, I betrayed you. Not, I hurt you. No. We grew apart. Shared blame always sounds cleaner. I listened quietly while he explained how unhappy he'd been, how misunderstood he felt, how the relationship lacked excitement, how Vanessa understood him. I almost admired the confidence. A man cheating inside a building secretly owned by his wife, explaining loyalty to her. Life really is strange. Finally, he sighed. I think divorce might be best. I nodded slowly. If that's what you want. He looked surprised again. No screaming, no begging, no emotional breakdown. That unsettled him more than anger would have. I expected this to be harder, he admitted. I looked directly into his eyes. It will be. He frowned slightly, but before he could ask what I meant, I stood up. I'm tired, Daniel. Then I walked upstairs. That night I didn't cry, not because I wasn't hurt, because something else had replaced the pain. Clarity. For the first time in years, I stopped seeing Daniel as my husband and started seeing him exactly as he was. A man who mistook kindness for weakness, and weak people become reckless the moment they think they've won, which was perfect, because reckless people make expensive mistakes, and Daniel was about to make the biggest one of his life. The next morning, Daniel acted strangely cheerful. That's another thing people don't talk about enough. Sometimes the person betraying you becomes happier after hurting you. Not because they're evil movie villains, because they feel relieved that their secret is finally becoming reality, relieved that they no longer need to pretend, relieved that someone else is carrying the pain instead of them. Daniel walked around the kitchen humming while pouring coffee. Meanwhile, I sat across from him thinking about legal structures, trust agreements, property rights, lease clauses. Funny how different our mornings were. You should probably start looking for another job, he said casually. Another job. I almost smiled into my coffee. I'll manage, I replied. He nodded. Then he added something that revealed everything about his mindset. You know, none of this would have happened if you supported me emotionally. There it was. The blame transfer. The attempt to rewrite history. Suddenly, the years I spent supporting him through financial crises meant nothing. People like Daniel don't remember sacrifices once they no longer need them. I stood calmly. I have a meeting today. With who? With someone who values contracts. He looked confused again. Good. Confused people reveal more than confident people. That afternoon, I met with Eleanor Brooks, 72 years old, sharp mind, cold eyes, the best corporate attorney my father ever trusted. She had known me since I was 19, and unlike most people around Daniel, she wasn't impressed by charm. We sat in her office overlooking downtown. I explained everything: the affair, the humiliation, the office, the divorce. She listened silently. Then she removed her glasses. And he still doesn't know you own the building? No. A slow smile appeared on her face. That was very careless of him. Yes, I said softly. Yes, it was. Eleanor opened several folders. You structured ownership beautifully, she said. The holding company traces back to your father's trust. Daniel has no legal claim. I nodded. What about the lease? Month-to-month renewal clause. Now she looked impressed. You planned this? No, I admitted. My father did. She leaned back slowly. Smart man. He really was. Back then I thought Dad was overly cautious. Now I understood. He wasn't teaching paranoia. He was teaching protection. Eleanor reviewed more documents. The company is already struggling with cash flow again, she noted. I blinked. What? She slid financial reports toward me. Daniel had been hiding losses, luxury spending, bad investments, risky expansion. And now the company was bleeding money quietly. Suddenly, everything made sense. The arrogance, the overspending, the desperation to impress investors. Daniel wasn't becoming powerful. He was becoming unstable. And Vanessa? Eleanor asked. I sighed. She thinks she won. Eleanor chuckled softly. Mistresses often confuse attention with security. I stared out the window. For a moment, sadness hit me again. Not over Daniel, over myself, over how long I ignored reality. You know the difficult part? I whispered. What? I would have stayed loyal forever. Eleanor's expression softened. That says something good about you, not him. Silence settled between us. Then she closed the file. What do you want to do? That question mattered, because revenge without direction becomes destruction. I thought carefully. I don't want chaos, I said. I want consequences. Eleanor smiled. Good answer. Then she outlined a plan. Professional, precise, legal, beautiful. First, we would allow Daniel to continue acting recklessly. People reveal their worst decisions when they believe they're untouchable. Second, we would gather documentation regarding misuse of company funds. Third, we would wait. Timing matters, especially in public humiliation. A few days later, the company announced a major investor presentation. Press, executives, clients, industry media. Daniel planned to present Vanessa as the company's new creative future. And during that same presentation, he intended to officially remove me from executive leadership, publicly, in front of everyone. When I heard that, Eleanor only asked one question. What time does the event start? And that was the moment I realized something. Daniel thought he was writing the ending of my story. He had no idea he was walking directly into mine. The investor gala was held on a Friday evening. Daniel loved Friday events. He always said people spent money more easily after champagne. The ballroom glittered with expensive lighting and fake confidence. Executives laughed too loudly. Investors pretended to care about innovation. Employees smiled nervously. And everywhere I looked, people were performing success. I arrived alone. Simple black dress, minimal jewelry, no dramatic entrance. Still, conversations slowed when people saw me. News travels fast inside companies, especially ugly news. I noticed Vanessa immediately. She stood beside Daniel wearing a silver gown like she was already the company queen. He kept touching her back casually, publicly, disrespectfully. He wanted people to see it. That told me everything about his ego. Humiliation wasn't enough. He needed witnesses. A young employee approached me nervously. Mrs. Carter, it's good to see you. Mrs. Carter, not for much longer. Thank you, I said kindly. Her eyes filled with sympathy. That almost broke me more than cruelty did. Because sympathy confirms, The humiliation is real. At 7:30, Daniel stepped onto the stage. The audience applauded. He smiled confidently under the lights. Once upon a time, I loved watching him speak. Now I only saw performance. Tonight, he announced, marks a new chapter for Carter Creative Group. I folded my hands quietly. He spoke about growth, innovation, expansion, future opportunities. Then his tone shifted. And growth sometimes requires difficult changes. There it was. Several people glanced toward me immediately. Daniel continued. Some individuals become attached to old systems, old ideas, old limitations. Coward. If you want to attack someone publicly, at least use their name. But leadership means embracing the future. Then he smiled toward Vanessa. And speaking of the future, I'm proud to introduce our new creative director, Vanessa Reed. Applause. Artificial. Uncomfortable. Vanessa walked onto the stage, glowing with confidence. Daniel kissed her cheek in front of everyone. A few people visibly cringed. Good. That meant some morality still existed in the room. Then Daniel looked directly at me. Claire has decided to step away from executive operations. Liar. She's been under a lot of emotional stress lately. There it was again. Emotional, weak, unstable. He needed that narrative, because if I looked strong, he looked cruel. The audience shifted awkwardly. Daniel thought he was controlling the room. But tension has its own energy. People knew this wasn't professional. This was personal. And then Daniel made the mistake that changed everything. He laughed, a small, arrogant laugh. Sometimes people confuse loyalty with ownership. Ownership, interesting word choice, because at exactly that moment, Eleanor Brooks entered the ballroom, and she wasn't alone. Behind her walked two property attorneys, a financial auditor, and the actual building manager. I saw Daniel's smile flicker. Good. Eleanor moved calmly through the crowd like she belonged there. Because she did. She reached the front of the stage. Then she looked directly at Daniel. Excuse me, she said clearly. The ballroom became silent. My client requires clarification regarding ownership. Daniel frowned. I'm sorry, this is a private corporate event. Eleanor smiled politely. And this is a privately owned building. Now people looked confused. Vanessa glanced nervously toward Daniel. He adjusted his tie. What exactly is this about? Eleanor opened a folder. Effective immediately, the property owner has chosen not to renew Carter Creative Group's lease agreement. The room froze. Daniel stared blankly. What? The building manager stepped forward. You've received multiple notices regarding financial violations and unauthorized renovations. Daniel looked panicked now. This is insane. I'll contact the owner personally. And that was my moment. I stood slowly. Every eye in the ballroom turned toward me. I walked calmly toward the stage. Daniel looked irritated, then confused, then uncertain. Finally, afraid. Because deep down, he already understood. I stopped beside Eleanor. Then I looked directly at my husband. You're already speaking to the owner. Silence. Pure silence. Even the music stopped. Vanessa's face lost color instantly. Daniel stared at me like he had never seen me before. What are you talking about? He whispered. I took the folder from Eleanor. The building belongs to Ashford Holdings. His forehead tightened. He knew the name, but not the truth behind it. I continued calmly. Ashford Holdings belongs to me. The room exploded into whispers. Daniel's face went completely pale. No, he said immediately. Not angry, desperate. No, that's impossible. I looked at him quietly. You never asked who saved this company 3 years ago. Vanessa stepped backward slowly. Smart girl. She finally realized she attached herself to the wrong power. Daniel shook his head. You're lying. Eleanor handed him official documents. Everything has been verified. His hands actually trembled. That surprised me. For the first time in years, Daniel looked small. And honestly, that wasn't satisfying. It was sad. Because I remembered the man he used to be. Or maybe the man I imagined he was. But the night wasn't over. Not even close. Because Daniel still didn't know how much trouble he was truly in. And neither did Vanessa. After the announcement, the ballroom turned into chaos. Executives whispered in corners. Investors checked phones nervously. Employees stared openly. And Daniel? Daniel looked like a man trying to hold water in his hands. Everything kept slipping away. Claire, he hissed quietly, stepping toward me. What are you doing? Interesting question, because people rarely ask what they've done, only what's happening to them. I'm protecting my assets, I replied calmly. You're humiliating me. I almost laughed. Humiliating him? This man gave his mistress my office in front of the entire company. He announced my removal publicly. He called me unstable. But now humiliation suddenly mattered. Funny how that works. Eleanor stepped between us professionally. Mr. Carter, there are additional financial concerns requiring immediate review. Daniel blinked. What concerns? The auditor opened another file. Misuse of corporate expense accounts, unauthorized investor funds, personal expenditures billed to the company. Vanessa's eyes widened slowly. Oh, so she didn't know everything. Interesting. Daniel lowered his voice aggressively. This isn't the place for this conversation. The auditor remained calm. Unfortunately, your investors disagree. One older investor stepped forward angrily. You told us expansion numbers were stable. Another added, you hid operational debt? Daniel started sweating visibly. For years he survived on confidence, but confidence collapses quickly when paperwork appears, and unlike emotion, documents don't panic. Vanessa finally spoke. Daniel, what's happening? That sentence carried fear, not loyalty. Fear. Because opportunistic people love success, but they disappear during consequences. Daniel ignored her. Big mistake. She looked insulted instantly, then suspicious. The room became louder. Investors argued, employees whispered, phones appeared everywhere. I realized something in that moment. People don't actually love powerful men. They love proximity to power. And once power disappears, admiration vanishes almost immediately. One executive approached me carefully. Claire, did you know about the financial problems? I answered honestly. Not until recently. That mattered. Because unlike Daniel, I still respected truth. Meanwhile, Vanessa pulled Daniel aside. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard enough. You told me the company was thriving, Daniel whispered angrily. Not now. You said Claire was bitter because she contributed nothing. Ouch. There it was. The lies collapsing publicly. I watched Daniel's face carefully. Not because I enjoyed his suffering, because I wanted to understand something. How does someone betray the person who helped build their life? Ego? Greed? Validation? Maybe all three. Eventually, the ballroom emptied. Investors left first. That's always how it happens. Money runs before loyalty does. Employees scattered next. Nobody wanted to be associated with disaster. Soon, only a few people remained. Daniel sat alone at a table staring blankly ahead. Vanessa stood several feet away, scrolling through her phone nervously, distance already growing between them. Amazing. 3 hours earlier, she looked triumphant. Now she looked trapped. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt tired, deeply tired. Because revenge sounds exciting in stories. But in real life, watching someone destroy themselves feels heavier than people expect. As I prepared to leave, Daniel finally spoke. You planned this. I stopped, then turned slowly. No, I said. You planned this the moment you forgot who stood beside you. He stared at me silently. For once, no clever response came. No charm, no manipulation, just silence. And silence can be brutally honest. That night I drove home alone. The city lights blurred through the windshield. I expected satisfaction. Instead, memories kept replaying. The early years, the tiny office, cheap takeout dinners, shared dreams. Sometimes grief doesn't come from losing the person. It comes from realizing the future you imagined never truly existed. When I reached home, I found Daniel sitting in the dark living room. He looked exhausted, older somehow. I didn't know, he said quietly. I placed my keys down. I know. He looked up. Why didn't you tell me? That question almost stunned me. Why didn't I tell him? As if secrecy was the betrayal here. Because I wanted one thing in my life that belonged to me, I answered. He swallowed hard. Then he asked the question that revealed his priorities completely. What happens to the company now? Not, can we fix this? Not, I'm sorry. No. The company. Always the company. I sat across from him. That depends on the investigation. Fear crossed his face again. Claire, you should probably call your lawyer. And then something unexpected happened. Daniel started crying. Not dramatic sobbing. Quiet breaking. I had never seen him cry before. Part of me softened instantly. Love leaves echoes even after betrayal. But another part of me remembered standing near storage while his mistress sat in my office. So I stayed silent. Because some consequences arrive too late for apologies. 7. The truth. Vanessa never expected. By Monday morning, rumors had spread across the entire city. Corporate scandals travel faster than honesty, especially when wealthy people embarrass themselves publicly. Articles appeared online. Creative agency faces financial investigation. Executive marriage drama explodes during investor gala. Property ownership revelation shocks industry. Daniel stopped answering most calls. Investors demanded emergency meetings. Employees feared layoffs. And Vanessa? Vanessa disappeared from the office entirely, at least for 2 days. Then she called me. I almost ignored it. But curiosity won. Hello? Silence. Then, I need to talk to you. Her voice sounded completely different. No arrogance, no confidence, just anxiety. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. Vanessa arrived wearing sunglasses even though it was raining. People only do that when they're hiding from shame. She sat carefully across from me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she removed the glasses. Her eyes looked exhausted. I didn't know, she whispered. I stirred my coffee slowly. About the building? About everything. Interesting. Because now that the illusion collapsed, she wanted distance from the damage. I thought your marriage was already over, she admitted. I believed her. Not because she deserved sympathy, because Daniel absolutely would have said that. Cheaters often present themselves as trapped victims. It makes betrayal feel romantic instead of selfish. Vanessa looked down. He told me you hated the company, that you never contributed, that you wanted him to fail. Amazing. The man I protected for years painted me as the enemy. I stayed calm. What do you want from me, Vanessa? Her hands trembled slightly. The financial team contacted me this morning. Ah, now we reach the real reason for the meeting. Fear. They said some expenses were approved through my department. I watched her carefully. You signed documents without reading them? Tears filled her eyes instantly. I trusted him. There it was. The sentence women destroy themselves with every day. I trusted him. Vanessa covered her face briefly. He bought me gifts using company accounts. Trips too. Of course he did. Daniel loved using money to create admiration. The problem was, much of that money wasn't really his. I never asked questions, she whispered. No, because people enjoying benefits rarely investigate the source. She looked up desperately. Am I in legal trouble? I answered honestly. Possibly. Her face collapsed. For a moment, I almost pitied her completely. Then I remembered her sitting in my office. Her smile, her arrogance, her pity. Life moves quickly. 1 week can transform confidence into panic. I'm sorry, she said quietly. And surprisingly, I believed that too. Not because she was innocent, because reality had finally humbled her. That changes people, sometimes permanently. She wiped her eyes. Did you ever love him? What a strange question. Yes, I answered immediately. Very much. She stared at me. Then why are you so calm? I thought carefully before responding. Because eventually you realize revenge isn't screaming, it's surviving. Silence settled between us. Then Vanessa whispered something that surprised me. He's still lying. I frowned. What do you mean? He told investors the financial problems were your fault. I almost laughed. Of course. Even now. Even after exposure. Daniel still searched for someone else to blame. Vanessa leaned closer. There's more. Then she handed me a flash drive. I copied files from his laptop. I stared at it. What's on this? Hidden accounts, investor transfers, emails. Interesting. Very interesting. Why give this to me? Her expression hardened slightly. Because now I know what kind of man he really is. Pain changes perspective quickly. I took the flash drive slowly, and in that moment, I understood something important. Daniel spent years manipulating women differently. I was the stable wife. Vanessa was the exciting validation. But eventually, selfish people betray everyone around them, not just one person. As we stood to leave, Vanessa paused. You know what scares me most? What? He never looked guilty. I nodded slowly, because that was the truly frightening part. Not the affair, not the lies, not even the financial deception. It was how comfortable Daniel became while hurting people who trusted him. And unfortunately for him, comfortable people stopped being careful, which meant the files on that flash drive were about to change everything. 3 weeks later, Carter Creative Group held an emergency board meeting. Technically, Daniel was still CEO, but barely. Investors were furious. Employees were nervous. Clients were leaving. And financial investigators kept requesting documents. The company wasn't collapsing because of me. It was collapsing because Daniel built success on performance instead of stability. And eventually, performance runs out. I arrived at headquarters early, the same building Daniel once believed belonged to him. Security greeted me differently now, respectfully. News changes people's behavior fast. Inside the elevator, I looked at my reflection calmly. No anger anymore. No sadness either. Just clarity. That felt strangely peaceful. The boardroom was silent when I entered. Daniel sat at the far end looking exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes. Wrinkled suit. Nervous hands. Vanessa wasn't there. Smart decision. Several board members nodded politely toward me. Interesting. Months earlier, they barely acknowledged my presence. Now suddenly they respected my insight. People often confuse wealth with wisdom. The meeting began immediately. One investor spoke first. "We've reviewed the financial discrepancies." Daniel straightened defensively. "Temporary setbacks." Another investor slid documents across the table. 7 undisclosed accounts are not temporary setbacks. Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked toward me briefly, still searching for rescue, still believing I might save him. That realization hurt more than expected. Not because I wanted reconciliation, because even after everything, he still saw me as useful, not valuable. Useful. The auditor continued presenting evidence: luxury travel, unauthorized spending, misleading investor reports, and finally, false internal narratives blaming executive instability on me. One board member looked disgusted. "You attempted to damage your wife's credibility to protect yourself?" Daniel snapped. "She was undermining the company." I finally spoke. "No, Daniel. I was supporting it while you performed success for strangers." Silence. Heavy silence. He stared at me, and for a second, I saw the old version of him, the young, ambitious man from years ago, scared, desperate, human. Then ego returned. "You think you're better than me because you had family money?" There it was, the resentment, the insecurity. Maybe that was the real problem all along. Not success, not Vanessa, pride. "I never cared about being better than you," I said softly. "I just wanted a partner." That sentence hit the room harder than yelling would have. Daniel looked away immediately. One investor cleared his throat. "Given the evidence, the board is voting for immediate leadership removal." Daniel's face lost color. "No." Another board member nodded. "The company cannot survive under your management." He looked around desperately. Nobody defended him. Not one person. That's the brutal truth about reputation. When respect is built on fear or image, it disappears instantly during crisis. The vote passed unanimously. Daniel Carter was removed as CEO. Just like that. Years of ego reduced to one quiet decision. He stood abruptly. "You're all making a mistake." Nobody responded. Then his eyes landed on me. For a moment I thought he would apologize, really apologize. But instead he whispered, "You ruined my life." I looked at him sadly. "No, Daniel." Then I stood too. "You did that the moment you forgot loyalty has value." And with that, I walked out. Not triumphantly, not dramatically, quietly. Because the loudest revenge had already happened. Truth. Divorce papers arrived 2 months later. Clean, fast, almost emotionless. Funny how people who create chaos suddenly want efficiency once consequences appear. Daniel moved into a luxury apartment temporarily, then downgraded quietly after several financial assets froze. The company survived under new leadership. Barely. Several employees later told me they considered leaving long before the scandal. Apparently, fear and arrogance had poisoned the environment for years. I wasn't surprised. Toxic leadership always spreads eventually. As for Vanessa, she cooperated fully with investigators. Most legal pressure against her disappeared after evidence confirmed Daniel controlled the financial decisions. We never became friends. But strangely, we stopped being enemies. Because once illusions disappear, reality becomes easier to understand. Months passed. For the first time in years, my life became quiet, really quiet. At first, the silence felt lonely, then peaceful. I started traveling again, reading, sleeping properly, eating dinner without tension sitting across from me. I also did something unexpected. I reopened my father's old notebooks, business notes, letters, advice. One sentence stayed with me constantly. Protect your heart, Claire, but never harden it. That mattered, because after betrayal, bitterness feels tempting, safe. But bitterness also turns pain into identity. I refused to let Daniel shape the rest of my life. One rainy afternoon, nearly a year later, I received a message from him. Simple. Can we talk? I almost ignored it. Then curiosity returned again. We met at a small restaurant near the river. Daniel looked older, not physically, emotionally. Consequences age people differently. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, he sighed. I was angry at you for a long time. I waited. Because you were stronger than me. That surprised me. Not because it was flattering. Because it sounded honest. Real honesty. Possibly for the first time in years. I thought success would make me feel important, he admitted. But nothing was ever enough. I looked at him quietly. And Vanessa? He laughed bitterly. She left months ago. Of course. Fantasy relationships rarely survive real consequences. Daniel rubbed his hands together nervously. I did love you. I believe that too, in a damaged way. Selfish people can still love. They just love badly. I know, I said softly. He looked surprised. Then he asked, Do you hate me? I thought carefully. No. And that was true. Hate requires emotional investment. What I felt now was distance, perspective, acceptance. Daniel looked down. I'm sorry. Finally. Simple words. No excuses. No blame. Just sorry. The apology came too late to save the marriage, but not too late to matter, because accountability matters, even after endings. When we left the restaurant, rain covered the streets. Daniel paused before walking away. You know the worst part? He asked. What? I spent years chasing admiration from strangers while ignoring the person who actually loved me. Then he walked into the rain. And honestly, that was punishment enough. 10. The lesson. Nobody talks about people love revenge stories because they expect explosions, public destruction, perfect justice. But real revenge rarely looks dramatic. Sometimes real revenge is much quieter. Sometimes it's simply refusing to let betrayal destroy your future. When Daniel gave his mistress my office, he believed power belonged to visibility, titles, attention, control. But real power? Real power is stability, discipline, patience, self-respect. He never understood that. That's why he lost everything. Not because I exposed him, because eventually arrogance exposes itself. The truth is, I could have destroyed Daniel much earlier. I had resources, evidence, leverage. But revenge driven by emotion becomes messy. Revenge driven by clarity becomes consequence. There's a difference. And if someone listening to this story is going through betrayal right now, remember something important. People who humiliate others publicly often feel powerful temporarily, But character always reveals itself eventually. Always. Sometimes through money, sometimes through pressure, sometimes through success, and sometimes through the quiet moment when nobody is left to blame except themselves. As for me, I kept the building. But more importantly, I kept myself. And after everything that happened, that mattered more than any company ever could. Because losing a marriage hurts. Losing trust hurts. But losing your dignity? That's the real disaster. Thankfully, I never gave mine away. Daniel did. And in the end, that made all the difference.